We've got today, this morning, and tomorrow morning as the final sessions of Srila Prabhupada, the Living Bhagvata. When I was in Soho Street, I started on the topic of association. We got about halfway through that, so I'd like to continue with that, and we'll see where we get. Maybe we can complete it before I leave. And tomorrow afternoon, there's another session, final session. Last year when I was here, I showed a slideshow about the Bhaktivedanta Research Center in Calcutta, the BRC. So I have an update on that. There's a lot of amazing stuff that we found there in this collection that we got from what was originally the main library of the Gaudiya Mat, the Bhagvata Mat, in the 1930s. So we have that whole library, and there's some pretty amazing stuff in it. So we'll be showing that tomorrow afternoon. Who is actually in charge of setting up the programs? No, Shringer? 6 p.m. And it'll be where? Right here in the temple room. Okay, very good. So if you can set up the slideshow projector. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so on the topic of association, I've already talked a fair bit about Prabhupada's emphasis of the need of good association, association with devotees, association with Mahajans, and disassociation from those who are entangled in matter, and disassociation also from the modes of material nature, at least the lower modes of material nature. Of course, another kind of association, probably the most powerful impulse that we have, that attraction between the opposite sexes, man and woman, that association also is there, and it has to be dealt with. Because we see in Vaishnav culture, spiritual culture, out of the 4 ashrams, Prabhupada says, 3 of them restrict that association: brahmacharya, vanaprastha, and sannyas. Only in 1 ashram is the association of men and women encouraged. Of course, in some lines of spiritual development, they don't even accept the grihastas as an ashram. You have to just give it up, and the Mayavadis do that. But in the Vaishnav culture, we have an ashram for men and women to associate together because they can use that association very constructively in the service of Lord Krishna. So in that way, because we recognize the material energy, so-called material energy, is actually Krishna's energy, then we can actually turn anything that we find in the material world into some opportunity to serve Krishna. So when Prabhupada came to the West, of course, he was coming from a background in India where no ashrams, at least the mats in the Gaudiya Mat, they didn't allow women to live in the ashrams. They were expected to stay at home under the care and protection of their families. If they got married, of course, they would be with their husbands. And the mats actually were essentially for sannyasis and brahmacharis. And that was the situation. When Prabhupada came to the West, he found a completely different situation where intermingling of boys and girls was very common. It was the standard. And he also saw that when he started preaching, there were so many girls that were starting to come. They'd heard the philosophy and they wanted to join the Krishna consciousness movement. So therefore, he felt obliged. He couldn't tell them, well, you stay at home and live with your parents and come around. In India, he was doing that. Any of the young Indian girls that were coming, he would advise them, you stay at home, you come around every day and do some service, and then you go home. Because the culture was still there sufficiently that it would kind of support them living at home and still being Krishna conscious. But in the West, it was a different situation. Many of the girls that came had already left home a long time ago, and they were freewheeling, basically. So he had to find somewhere, some accommodation, so that they could take up their spiritual lives effectively. At the same time, doing that, having boys and girls in the temple, that inevitably led to, their wanting to associate together. And therefore, Prabhupada in the early days developed a formula of getting everybody married. So anybody that would come along, they would immediately be, lined up with somebody, suitable partner, and then they would get married. And Prabhupada made a discovery that, because the American girls were just as effective and enthusiastic to preach Krishna consciousness as their godbrothers were. In India, it was, again, a different culture. Women were not expected to put themselves forward, but in America, it's completely different. So Prabhupada utilized what he found there in American culture and channeled that into his efforts to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. So he fairly quickly developed a policy. It was almost like a policy of getting the boys and girls married and then sending them out to go and preach. And they would, go in couples. He felt that together they would have association with each other, and then they would be able to stay someplace, go to a city, start preaching, and open up a new center. So that was his plan. Whereas in India, in the Gaudiya Mat, their policy was, the sannyasis or brahmacharis were sent out and they would open new centers. Prabhupada actually developed a policy where he would get his boys and girls married and then send them out as couples to different cities and spread Krishna consciousness. And of course, the best example of that always is the 3 couples that came here to London, to England. And Prabhupada was very proud of the fact that whereas the sannyasis and brahmacharis that had come in the 1930s had failed, his 3 householder couples had succeeded beyond all expectation. So in that way, he was very happy with that. However, it didn't stop there. And as things developed, gradually Prabhupada started seeing that because of the restlessness, of Western culture and the lack of commitment to marriage in particular, that soon started to become a problem. The same boys and girls that he'd encouraged to get married, and in fact had performed some wedding ceremonies himself, after just a couple of years, as soon as there was a little difficulty, then they were breaking up, and then there was all kinds of problems and disturbance coming in, which was actually disturbing their ability to serve Krishna. So by the mid-70s, he had kind of reversed his policy and declared that he was not going to get involved anymore in his disciples getting married, because in the beginning he had personally got them married or even put some together, but then he saw that they were breaking up, so he didn't think that that was very good. So then he withdrew his personal participation, although of course he encouraged his disciples to get married, because as he said, 99% of the world's population has to be married. There's very few rare souls that can remain brahmachari or brahmacharini and not, get involved in that whole thing. So by 1975, Prabhupada had developed a new mantra based on these problems that were going on in his grihastha, ashram devotees. So this is, again, I gave the example of the 3 householder couples that Prabhupada, really, their efforts had really inspired him with this idea of having married couples going out and preaching. But now by 1975, then he reversed that. And this is a letter that, or an exchange that he had with Guru Das, who, of course, was one of those 3 householder couples, one half of the combination of Guru Das and Jamuna. And by 1975, they'd had various difficulties in their partnership, and then they had split up. And actually in July of 1975, Prabhupada actually gave Guru Das sannyas. So he became Guru Das Swami, and Jamuna had returned to the West and was kind of, setting up herself in an ashram in Oregon. So this is on December the 22nd, 1975. Prabhupada was in Bombay. So Gurudas Swami, one of the first devotees in San Francisco and one of the original householders to begin preaching in London, sent an enthusiastic letter from America about his preaching activities and his newfound freedom since recently taking sannyas. Prabhupada was very satisfied to hear he is wholeheartedly engaged in Krishna's service, freed from distraction. He wrote back encouraging him to go on, and he added what he described to us as his new slogan. So this was Prabhupada's new mantra. He said, "I always say, man is good and woman is good, but when they combine, they become bad." So that was, before he said there was so much difficulty, but now you are doing well, and Jamuna Dasi is also doing well, and I am very pleased. Sorry, let me just... I'm very pleased with your work. Please continue like this and keep me informed. So that was Prabhupada's little new mantra that he wrote there. A few months later, he came to Hawaii. Of course, Hawaii has always been a place where it's been difficult to perform austerities and penances. It's kind of like a heavenly planet kind of atmosphere. And we were there for a month. And Prabhupada had plenty of time to observe what was going on. So on May the 24th, it was Ekadasi. And in the car driving out for his morning walk, Prabhupada sat back and laughingly exclaimed, "I have a new theory. Man is good, woman is good. But when they combine together, they become bad." So he said, in this past December, when he received a letter from Gurudas Swami saying how pleased he was that Prabhupada had relieved him of his association with his wife, Prabhupada had written his new theory back to him. He has practical experience of how nicely his male and female disciples serve, but how much disturbance comes as soon as they combine. Still, it cannot be avoided, and he has to push on, encouraging them all to chant and to do as much as they can. He said that being married is better than what he calls becoming a bachelor daddy. That's another little phrase that he coined, a bachelor daddy. He's not married, but he wants to mix with women. This is another term he has coined to refer to men who refuse to get married but still associate with women. They pose as brahmacharis, but their real mentality is to simply avoid responsibility. They're not actually detached. Although Srila Prabhupada sometimes laughs about it, as he mentioned yesterday in class, he does not find this kind of hypocrisy at all welcome. So, another little slogan there, bachelor daddies. So, Gurudas had sent his letter in December, and a couple of weeks later, Prabhupada received in early 1976 a letter from Jamuna Dasi, who was his former wife. So during the massage, Tamal Krishna Goswami went over the day's mail. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj had just arrived on January the 1st to be Prabhupada's secretary for that month. And we were down in Bombay. So he read out a letter from Jamuna Dasi. She and Dinatarani Dasi have a small farm in Oregon. On Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disappearance day, Jaitirtha had installed deities of Sri Sri Radha Ban Bihari there. They're hoping to start an ashram for senior women, and they requested financial assistance from the BBT to buy a place. Their idea is to have about 12 women and gradually begin a preaching program. Jamuna, however, did express some apprehension, admitting, generally women are mad after sense gratification, to dip and gossip. So, thus we feel to proceed with careful attention. So in a separate letter, Jayatirtha also inquired whether a BBT loan could be given for the ladies' project. He said the property that they're looking at costs $100,000 and requires a down payment of $25,000. He wanted to know what priority Prabhupada was giving to this kind of project, suggesting that he might help oversee the managerial and financial concerns. He also suggested that Jamuna and the other ashram members could earn some income and help support themselves by sewing deity clothes for the sannyasis traveling parties. So, of course, by 1976, there were about 6 or 7 buses, Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan. They all had deities installed. There was I've seen a picture in Chicago in July of 1975. I think it was the same day that Gurudas took sannyas. There was a multiple installation of 5 or 6 sets of Gaunitai deities, and they were put onto each bus. So I guess Jai Tirtha's idea was that, the men are out selling books every day, the brahmacharis on the buses, so there's not enough time, or maybe they don't have the skill as the ladies do for sewing deity clothes and making deity clothes. So the ladies in this ashram proposed by Jamuna, they could make the deity clothes and sell them to the buses, and that would give them some little income. So Prabhupada's personal opinion is that the women should not live independently. Why don't they go to LA? He asked Tamal Krishna. Nevertheless, since they're eager to begin the project, he encouraged them. You can attract the fair sex community, he wrote. Most of them are frustrated, being without husband or home. If you can organize all these girls, they will get transcendental engagement and may not be allured to the frustration of life. Your engagement should be chanting and worship of the deity. He also tactfully laid down strict guidelines for the ladies to follow, stressing that as single women, they should live very humbly and not dress nicely to attract men, nor attempt to start any large program. In Bhakti, he wrote, there is no grotesque program. A humble program is better. We are doing all these grotesque programs to allure the masses. My Guru Maharaj used to say that nobody hears from a person coming from a humble, simple life. So you remain always very humble. To Jai Tirtha, however, he spoke more candidly, describing their desire to be independent as a defect. He further elaborated on this by saying that according to Vedic culture, a woman cannot live independently. He decided that if they wanted this badly enough, he would allow it. But they must function managerially and financially independent of ISKCON, although he conceded that Jai Tirtha could check on them now and then to see if they were chanting and following the rules of the society. He also made it clear that there could be no connection whatsoever with sannyasis. So that was in January. It's interesting that Prabhupada said that they should remain outside of ISKCON, but they should be checked and helped, so that they keep up the proper standards. So Prabhupada at that point was not keen on having a completely separate, ladies-only ashram. And as he was saying, telling Jamuna, you stay very humbly, you dress very simply, and you do basically he was telling them to become bhajan and andis. Yeah, you stay and you chant and you read and you do your deity worship. And that he approved. So a few months later then, when we were in Honolulu, this was on May 16th, 1976, Jamuna and Dinatarani Dasi sent some beautiful photos of their deities, Sri Sri Radha Ban Bihari, taken at their Gaurpurnima and Chandan Yatra festivals. Their letter enthusiastically expressed their satisfaction in living according to Srila Prabhupada's recent instructions to them. We have taken your instructions very seriously and live in such a way as to have virtually no association with men, living a pure, simple life in the full fire of Krishna consciousness. We think this is most beneficial and are actually tasting the results of this simple life. You know what is the proper engagement for each individual by dint of your complete purity. This is your special mercy. They also mentioned their desire to come and see Srila Prabhupada when he visits Los Angeles, but expressed their inability to do so due to a lack of funds. Prabhupada thanked them for the photos of the deities, which he said appeared to be nicely cared for. As for their coming to see him, Prabhupada was more than happy at the prospect. He was very glad that they are taking his suggestions seriously, and he wants to encourage them. He wrote, I am scheduled to be in Los Angeles from June 1st to June 11. I am even contemplating to come and see you there on your farm if you were unable to come and see me. Please continue to develop things there for the women devotees as previously instructed. And Prabhupada knew how to encourage people and enthuse them. So actually they did make it. At least Jamuna made it to Los Angeles. When we arrived on June 1st, she was there. And she cooked for Srila Prabhupada with Palika Dasi for the next 10, 11 days that we were there in Los Angeles. So on June the 5th then, since Jamuna has been here, Rameshwara discussed her farm program with Srila Prabhupada. So he was the new GBC for California. Prabhupada suggested that some brahmacharinis could be sent to her for training from Los Angeles. So this morning, Rameshwara asked if perhaps she could come down to Los Angeles instead, because it would be cheaper. He was a good money manager. There was some suggestion by Tamal Krishna that devotees going there may develop a bit of a separatist mentality from ISKCON. But Prabhupada didn't take that seriously. He simply said he had no objection if Rameshwara wanted to make that arrangement. But when Rameshwara told him that Jamuna objected and that her idea was to make her farm a little bigger with more women living there, Prabhupada told him, I like that idea. So although he'd expressed some reservation at the beginning, after he had a chance to think about it and he saw that they were doing it very seriously, whatever he told them, then they were doing that, then he said, yes, I like that, very good. So Rameshwara said there would be no men involved, and Prabhupada approved. Just like in Vrindavan, he said, there is Bhajan Ashram, there are only women. So that's a good idea, Rameshwara asked. With man is dangerous for both, Prabhupada told him. I have given that. Man is good, woman is good. When they come together, bad. Both of them bad. So he had practical experience. So, of course, they did do their ashram very nicely. They eventually left Oregon, and they ended up at Sharanagati Farm in Canada. I saw Jamuna there a couple of years ago. I went to Vancouver for a week, and I took the opportunity to go up to Sharanagati. That was my first and only visit. I went there actually to see her, just, to see how they were living, because I'd heard that they built this house of their own. They built it themselves, her and Dina Tarini, of straw bale. And when I got there, I saw it was a fabulous place, completely, totally Krishna conscious. Every inch of it was just exuding bhakti. Anyway, so that was Jamuna's program there, and so she took that very seriously the rest of her life, becoming dedicated to the deities, Radhaban Bihari. They still have them. Having that kind of secluded aspect to a practice of devotional service. Okay, so association, of course, as we say, it's very difficult. You have to handle. Prabhupada gave the example of butter and fire. Women are like fire, men are like butter. You put them together, the butter melts. So he said, in that way, he said, I've tried to think of ways and means of keeping them separate, but it's not possible. So he said, everybody should just go out and preach, and that will, compensate for any problems that might exist. So at least anyway, the principle of devotional service or any spiritual advancement is renunciation. And Prabhupada obviously talked on that quite frequently. One time was in October of 1976. He was just arrived in Vrindavan. We'd just been out. Well, we'd been in Vrindavan for a couple of months. Then Prabhupada went to Chandigarh for about a week to do some programs there. And then we came back to Vrindavan. So this was on 24th of October, and it was Govardhan Puja Day. So Prabhupada in his class continued with the theme of tapasya. And he discoursed from verse 2, chapter 5, canto 5. As Prabhupada surveyed his small array of disciples, Pradyumna Prabhu led the devotees in chanting the Sanskrit and then read out the translation. One can attain the path of liberation from material bondage only by rendering service to highly advanced spiritual personalities. These personalities are impersonalists and devotees. Whether one wants to merge into the Lord's existence or one wants to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one should render service to the Mahatmas. For those who are not interested in such activities, who associate with people fond of women and sex, the path to hell is wide open. The Mahatmas are equiposed. They do not see any difference between one living entity and another. They are very peaceful and are fully engaged in devotional service. They are devoid of anger, and they work for the benefit of everyone. They do not behave in any abominable way. Such persons are known as Mahatmas. So that was the verse. And Prabhupada repeated the Sanskrit and immediately went to the essence. Human life, he said, is meant for tapasya. And tapasya means beginning, tapasa brahmacharyena. Tapasya begins with brahmacharya, celibacy, no sex life. The whole yogic process means how to become freed from sexual desire. If we want to be freed from our material desires, he explained, then we have to develop a humble attitude and associate with and serve the Mahatmas. Of course, the best known example in Shastra of a good spiritualist Brahmana who by bad association fell down into very abominable condition was Ajamil. That's the whole history there given in the 6th canto. And Prabhupada actually lectured on that section of the Bhagavatam the whole time that we were in Hawaii. So for 1 month he was talking about the story of Ajamil, 6th canto, chapter 1. So then later on, actually whilst we were there in Hawaii, one of his early disciples, Hayagriva Prabhu, he made a comeback. So he had kind of in the early 70s, after playing a leading role for many years, he had drifted away from ISKCON and kind of got absorbed back in material activities for some time. But by 1976, he again came back looking for some engagement. And so, of course, with his qualification of being an English professor, he was immediately re-engaged in doing some service at the BBT. So one of the things that they asked him to do was to complete what was called the philosophy book. So that was a project that was started when Shyamasundar Prabhu was Prabhupada's secretary in 71. They were in Bombay. He had been a philosophy major, and so he suggested to Srila Prabhupada that if he summarized the philosophies of all the different, Greek philosophers and Western European philosophers, etc., then Prabhupada could comment on each, philosopher and their ideas and give the Vedic version. So Prabhupada was very enthusiastic about doing that. The idea was that would then be distributed amongst the universities and that could be studied in the philosophy courses. So they started the project. Shyamasundar had recorded many interviews, but then somehow or another he got distracted and, that whole project just kind of sat and nothing was happening with it. And Prabhupada would occasionally, write to the BBT and ask what is happening with the philosophy book. So this went on for several years. So when Hayagriva made his comeback in 76, then the BBT, they gave him all the tapes, all the recordings. He went over them, aspects of various philosophers that had been missed out in the original interviews. He reformulated questions on that. And plus there were quite a few other philosophers that Shyamasundar had not dealt with. And so he also developed, questions and answers sessions based on those. So in mid-May, then Hayagriva was flown by the BBT to Hawaii, and he spent 2 weeks with Srila Prabhupada every day, 2 or 3 hour sessions, very intense, discussing various philosophers like Socrates and Plato and all the rest of them. So when he arrived, it was quite a moving scene. Myself and Radha Ballabha Prabhu, who was the BBT production manager at that time, were in Prabhupada's room, and the door opened, and there's Hayagriva. He was quite a big man, over 6 feet tall and quite kind of solid. And he came in, and then he immediately just laid flat on the floor. And when he got up, he was crying, and he just said, "It's your old Hayagriva, Prabhupada." So Prabhupada immediately started crying. And it was, as I say, a very kind of poignant scene. And Prabhupada was so pleased to see him. He welcomed him back. And as I said, then from then on, they spent 2 weeks meeting every day, doing all these philosophy interviews. So then when we left Hawaii, then we went to Los Angeles. So in Los Angeles on June the 9th then, there was to be this world premiere of a new film about New Vrindavan called Spiritual Frontier. So that was like a documentary. It was meant to show simple living and high thinking, and it was based on, the activities and development of New Vrindavan, of which, of course, Kirtanananda and Hayagriva had been the founders, if you like. I wouldn't say founders. I'm always reluctant to use that word for activities that were started during the period that Prabhupada was still on the planet. At one point, somebody claimed that Tamal Krishna Maharaj was the founder of the Radha Damodar Travelling Sankirtan Party, but I disagreed with that, and I disagreed with the claim also that Kirtanananda was the founder of New Vrindavan. That project was actually done by Prabhupada's instigation and with Prabhupada's idea behind it, and he was actually therefore the founder, although Kirtanananda was the instrument, if you like, by which it was actually developed. Anyway, so he had come. He had just arrived from New Vrindavan. He came to see the premiere of the film, and of course Hayagriva was there. So this was on June 9th. Kirtanananda Swami arrived. He had flown in from Pittsburgh especially to view the premiere of a new film made by Yadabara Prabhu about New Vrindavan called Spiritual Frontier. Has anybody seen that film? Who's seen it? This is the problem with films. Yeah, it was a really nice film, and there's not a single person in this room that's even heard of it practically, what to speak about seeing it. It's in Yadabara's Following Srila Prabhupada series, I think, or either that one or the ITV series that Nishringananda put out. But it's a very nice film. It shows the simplicity and the high kind of ideals that we had. Maybe we were very naive in those days. But anyway, it was a very nice, exposition of life on the farm there. And their attempts to, live very simply. And Prabhupada really, really liked it. When it was shown in the evening, the whole temple room was packed up. About 500 devotees were there. And they projected it on the wall of the temple room. And Prabhupada was sitting on his Vyasasan watching. And at one point, there was a segment showing them cooking a feast. And it showed a wok, and it showed some puris floating in the hot ghee and, expanding up. And when that picture came on, I just happened to turn and look at Srila Prabhupada. Everybody else was glued to the screen. Prabhupada was looking, and when the puri came up on the screen, Prabhupada reached out like this, as if he was getting the puri, and went like that. And I just happened to turn and look at him just when he did it. It was really funny. So he really liked it. So anyway, before we saw the film, Kirtananda arrived. He had flown in from Pittsburgh especially to view the premiere of the new film. He brought with him some homemade ice cream and a considerable quantity of delicious New Vrindavan sweets. Prabhupada greeted him warmly, asking about his health and how things were going in New Vrindavan. Kirtananda said, "The devotees are all anxious to see you, Srila Prabhupada." So he had been there in 1974. He was due to go there again in 1975, but before he made it there, there was a special opportunity that came up in India. Indira Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister at that time, had agreed to meet with Prabhupada personally. And so Prabhupada cut off his tour. I think he was in Montreal at that time. He suddenly cut it off. He took the next plane back to India, and that was the end of the tour. So the devotees in New Vrindavan were a bit disappointed that Prabhupada, said he was going to come there, and then he didn't come. So in 1976, again, they were on the list of places to visit. And as Kirtananda said, all the devotees are anxious to see you. So Prabhupada broke out in a grin, and looking at Kirtananda Maharaj's old friend, Hayagriva, he joked, "Yes, and Hayagriva Maharaj is being forced." There's a reference to his coming back after being away. So he's being forced. So Hayagriva joined in, appreciating the affectionate attention. "You should cane me more, Srila Prabhupada." No, Prabhupada laughed. "Krishna is very cunning. One may try to leave him, but he is not going to leave you. Once come, no sir, you cannot go out." Just like our Ajamil. So he was a devotee in the beginning, and later on by bad association of a prostitute, he fell. But Krishna took him at the end. Swapamapi asya dharmasya trayate mahato bayat. Krishna gave him a chance to give him a son. He kept the son's name as Narayan. So on account of affection of the son, he was chanting Narayan, Narayan, Narayan. Just Krishna is so kind that, all right, this rascal is going out of my hand. All right, give him a child, Narayan. And he will chant Narayan, 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 and that will be his credit. So, Agyata Sukriti. Najanma Koti Sukriti B Api Labhyate. Sukriti, pious activities of many millions of birth, is not equal to love of Godhead. So, purchase Krishna consciousness anywhere it is available. But what is the price? Tatra lolyam ekalam mulyam. Only the greediness for it, hankering, that is the price. Oh, that I have got. No. Na janma koti sukriti bir api labhyate. You cannot obtain this price even after millions of births of pious activities. So, I agree, very gone, come back. Prabhupada saw that was Krishna's arrangement to trick him to coming back and doing more service, because he'd done something significant in the beginning. There was some problem, due to various reasons. But as Prabhupada said, once coming, Krishna says, no sir, you cannot go out. Yeah, well, that we were saying the other day, that quote from Lord Ram, the one who comes to me and says, sir, from today I am yours. If a person makes that declaration, then I never leave him. So Prabhupada saw that. We saw that many times. Devotees, they would come, they would do some nice service, and then for various reasons, they would appear to fall away. But actually, Krishna consciousness is always active. And after some time again, they come back and take up service again, because Krishna's not going to let us go. That's the nice thing. Yeah. So Hayagriva then, he was a good example of that. And just a point about Ajamil also. Prabhupada once told me that Ajamil's fall down was accidental. So I couldn't figure that one out, because, although in his early life, until his late youth, he was a good Brahmana, but then he got entangled with this prostitute, and then his whole life became completely debauched. It said he was a thief, a murderer, so many things he was doing. to support his family with the prostitute. So he was doing all kinds of illicit activities. So I couldn't figure out, how is that accidental? I mean, generally we don't consider an entire lifetime of, being fallen is an accidental fall down. But Prabhupada said, no, he said, in the beginning, he tried to control his mind. So he was a good Brahmana, and then he got disturbed. He tried to control his mind, but then he failed. So Prabhupada said, therefore it was accidental, because he tried to control it but couldn't stop. Accidental fall down. So I agree for anyway. Got the benefit of Prabhupada's attention. Okay, so men and women's association, of course, doesn't have to be a negative. It can be a positive if it's done in the right way. And as Prabhupada often said, that is the Grihastha ashram. The negative side of it is the Griyamedi non-ashram. When you live, you have your partnership just for sense gratification. But if the partnership is being used for serving Krishna, then it becomes a very positive force for making advancement in spiritual life. So, again, May the 14th, 1976 in Honolulu, Prabhupada was talking on that 6th canto, chapter 1. So in his class, this was on verse 13 to 14, he made it clear that we were to take the verse's statement very seriously. It is very difficult to perform tapasya, but the recommendation is there, tapasa brahmacharyena. So brahmacharya, celibacy, no sex life. So the senses may not be agitated. Dharmena, even if it is agitated, but by my knowledge I have to curve it down. Just like if I become agitated by seeing a beautiful girl, or for a woman, a beautiful boy. So that is natural. Young boy, young girl, they are all naturally attracted. So there is nothing surprising. But tapasa means that I have taken a vow, no illicit sex. That is knowledge. Even if I am attracted, I shall not do this. This is tapasa. And because I am now attracted, now we shall enjoy. That is not tapasa. He reassured us that even if it is difficult to control oneself, it can be done by practice and remembrance. I have taken a vow before the deity, before the fire, before my spiritual master, before the Vaishnavas. No illicit sex, no meat eating, no drinking or intoxication, and no gambling. I have promised it. So if I am a gentleman, how can I break my promise? So this is called gyan. With knowledge, one has to respect. And that is called tapasa, with knowledge. He said there are two kinds of persons who associate with the opposite sex, but they are not the same. He described the difference. Griyamedi and Grihastha. Grihastha means although he is living with wife and children, but he knows what is the aim of life. That is the Grihastha ashram. And as the sannyasi knows what is the aim of life, similarly, the Grihastha may also know. So, such Grihastha, sex life is allowed. One who knows the aim of life. And one who does not know the aim of life, simply enjoying sex, he is called a Griyamedi. So these two words are there. In Sanskrit literature, every word has got a particular meaning and a particular thought. Therefore it is called Samskrita, most performed and purified literature, Sanskrit. I think that should be perfect, actually. Most perfect and purified literature, Sanskrit. Sanskrit means purified, samskara. Just like we offer samskara at the time of initiation, purification. So our main problem is sex life, because sex life is the basic principle of material life. Therefore, it has to be handled very carefully. After Prabhupada's disappearance, of course, actually even before, many devotees have problems struggling with that. All of us have problems struggling with that. How to contain it and use it as a positive force. So the way to do that, of course, is that you have sex in order to have a child. You offer a body, in one sense, to another soul who can then be trained up in Krishna consciousness, and they can make that their last birth. If you can do that, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, if you can have such Krishna conscious children, he said, then I would have hundreds of children, because he was a lifelong celibate. But he was encouraging his grihastas. Yes, if you have children that you bring up as devotees, then it's very good. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also, he would compliment his householder disciples if he saw that they were having a child, and sometimes they would give a name, etc. So it's not disapproved in at least our line of spiritual development. That is also renunciation, as he says. That is tapasya, that you restrict it just for the purpose of having children, not that you cut it off completely. But if you just do it for plain ordinary sense enjoyment, that is not tapasya. And then by that means, then of course you go down, not up. So sometimes people, would object. There was one devotee, Rayaram, at the beginning he was very active, one of the early first initiates, and he was one of the first editors of Back to Godhead. So by 1969, 1970, he was having problems, as some of them, as we read about Hayagriva also. He was having some problems. And then at one point he wrote to Srila Prabhupada, he said, you were denying the necessities of life. And he left, because he couldn't follow the principles anymore, particularly sex. You were denying the necessities of life. I heard Prabhupada mention that. He referred to that several times when I was traveling with him. He would just shake his head and laugh. Yeah, he said, this is unfortunately the condition of Western society. He said that is the Westerner's permanent disease, sex life, sex desire. So at least he was trying to deal with that carefully, and therefore he encouraged the setup of the Grihastha ashram. But he laid down the standards for that. Later on, a few years back, there was one of our leading devotees who left, and he was advocating by that time the 3 regulative principles, right? The 3 regulative principles. The sex part, no, you can't restrict it. This is messing everybody's life up. In ISKCON, everybody's got completely psychologically messed up. Why? Because they're not allowed to have sex. And it's causing so much frustration, so their brains are becoming too disturbed. So he began advocating 3 regulative principles. So, of course, that misses the point. The point is that spiritual life begins with the realization, or at least theoretically, that we are not this body. That's the initiation point, that when you take initiation, you're beginning. Initiate means to begin something. And you accept that from this day on, I'm going to act as a spirit soul and not as a material body. That's the commitment. As Prabhupada said, you come before the fire, the guru, the deities, the Vaishnavas, etc. What is the vow? That I am not this body, I am now a spirit soul. My life is meant for serving Krishna and giving pleasure to Krishna. So then from that point, then we proceed. Now, if somebody if a guru wants his disciples to make serious advancement, then you have to draw a line at which point that realization begins, that I'm not this body. So there's so many pseudo-spiritual groups. Oh, it's love, or you can't deny the attraction of men and women. This is all love, and it's spiritual, and sex is spiritual, etc. There's one of our former gurus who actually openly advocates this and says that Prabhupada was wrong. So that means he has no realization actually what spiritual life is all about. The process of initiation begins at this point of understanding you are not the body. So still the impulse is there. Sexual impulse is very powerful. It's the underpinning of the entire material existence. So it's not given up very easily. But you have to start somewhere. That initiation point means then, all right, sex desire is there, but you don't do it for sense gratification. You do it to serve Krishna. That's the point. From now on, when I take initiation, everything that I do is for the pleasure of Krishna and to serve Krishna. So even sex desire can be employed in that way by having a child to bring up, or children to bring up, as Krishna's devotees and to educate them properly. Now, if we have sex for sense gratification, just for the sheer fun of it, as they say. What does that mean? It means I think I am this body. I'm not doing it for Krishna's pleasure. I'm doing it for my pleasure. And therefore, the bodily concept of life will increase. The more we have sex, the more we become convinced we are this body. Then where is the question of spiritual advancement? Of course, you can't have unlimited sense gratification either. This is the other argument that, your senses are there and you cannot have unlimited sense gratification. At some point, you'll get burnt out. It will become a disturbance. The same thing that's giving you pleasure at one moment will become a problem at the next. That's the nature of material engagement, because we do not have the capacity to enjoy on our own or independently, even if the facility is given to us. I was talking about this the other day. The capacity is not there. So we like to eat gulab jams, but then, all right, 5, 10, 15, 20, 50, 75, 100, how many can you eat? After a while, you become completely sick. I remember when I was a so-called brahmachari, in the early days in Australia, we had gone up to Brisbane, and we had a double-decker bus that we were traveling on. There was about 18 brahmacharis on it. And off we went, and there were a couple of devotees. They'd started a small preaching center in Brisbane. So that we got there for the Sunday feast. So somebody made some Simply Wonderfuls. Yeah, so that was the traditional ISKCON sweet, Simply Wonderfuls. So, being the lusty, passionate young man that I was, I ate 24 Simply Wonderfuls. Just, one after the other. And at the end of it, I was so distressed, I thought I was going to die. I got sugar burn so bad in my throat that I felt like I was going to die. After that, I didn't touch a Simply Wonderful for about 5 years. So that's the nature of, sense gratification. There's a limit to it. So people say, no, go out and enjoy. But how much can you enjoy? They go out, they want to get intoxicated. How much intoxication can you take before you're lying in the gutter, wallowing in your own vomit and having a so-called good time? Right? It goes on every Saturday night. England is the land of pubs. Right? On every street corner there's a pub. And that's the culture. Go out and get, sloshed. But after a while you learn, no, you have to check it. You can't go out and drink 20 pints of, lager or, what's that? Irish stuff that they have. What? Guinness. Yes, Guinness is known. Very powerful stuff. So, or whiskey or whatever it is. Or you go out, you take so many amphetamines or so-called ecstasy. Yeah, but if you take too much, you're not in ecstasy anymore. You blow your brains out. This is what happens in the name of enjoyment, but you end up destroying yourself. The fact is that unlimited sense engagement does not lead to unlimited happiness. It leads to actually degradation and distress. Everybody knows it. Therefore, you have to check it. Even if you want sense enjoyment, still you have to call, a boundary somewhere. And you have to check yourself. So with spiritual life, Prabhupada said, all right, you have to make a boundary. You have to make a certain level at which your spiritual life begins and you leave behind your material life. That means with, sex desire, which is the main chief sense enjoyment, all right, this is the boundary that Prabhupada, said was the cutoff point. That you have sex, yes, fine, but only for having children so that they can grow up as devotees of Krishna. Then you can have as much sex as you like. But if you want sex for sense enjoyment, no. Then you can't be initiated. You're not ready yet because you're not ready to accept that you are not this body. As long as we want that engagement, then all right, you go ahead and do it. You can chant, you can take prasadam, but you cannot be initiated because initiation means you are making a pact with Krishna that yes, now I know I'm not this body. I am your eternal servant, and whatever I'm going to do from here on in is going to be for your pleasure and not my own. So that Prabhupada made that distinction there. So you can't complain that Prabhupada didn't understand Western culture, he didn't understand, the habits of the Western devotees, and that the sociology of ISKCON is completely screwed because, Prabhupada made an impossible demand, no illicit sex. But this is actually, there are people that advocate this and talk like this, former disciples of Srila Prabhupada, that he was wrong. Prabhupada was a pure devotee. He knew the spiritual principles, but he did not know how to apply them properly in the Western context. This is an argument that has been, put out for the last 20, 25 years. And as I said, there's even a couple of former gurus of ISKCON who advocate this very philosophy. That means that they don't understand. It means that they become overwhelmed by their own desires for sense gratification and their own mistaken understanding of the self as being the body and not as a pure spirit soul. But if we want to actually make progress, therefore Prabhupada set up the Grihastha ashram with this standard. And then we have to at least try for it. As he said, at least officially you have to come to that position. It will take some time, but by practice it can be done. That's tapasya. So Prabhupada was very intelligent what he was doing. He didn't want that, you simply, all right, in name only you become a so-called disciple. He didn't want thousands or millions of disciples who don't follow anything, just in name only. He wanted a few serious people that were actually up to the standard of real spiritual advancement, because that way they'll have the potency to spread Krishna consciousness. But he wasn't interested in just large numbers of useless followers, third-class people. As he said, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left this planet early when he saw that he was making large numbers of third-class devotees. Because on the third-class platform, nothing can be done. It's simply arguing and fighting, that's all. But the real preaching work, that cannot be done on the third-class platform. It can only be done when there's a certain level of detachment and renunciation. That's the Majjhima platform. Okay, so it's 10 to 9. What time do we finish? Now? Okay. Okay, so I'll finish there. We'll continue on with this discussion tomorrow. This evening I'm in Coventry, but tomorrow we'll have a morning session, and then in the afternoon we'll show the slideshow with the library. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes, Kishore Prabhu. Well, I wasn't naming names. If you know the history, let's just say certain gurus, ex-gurus, who were in Europe, and no point in naming names, but that's the philosophy. Yes, sir. That became known as dialectic spiritualism. It's been published. It took a long time to get it out. It still wasn't, even after all this effort, with Hayagriva going and spending all this time with Prabhupada and working on it, somehow or another, because it was supposed to go out to the academics, and they have a, kind of almost like a different language, and they have, a different standard of what they consider to be scholarship, then some of our academic devotees didn't consider that book was actually up to standard, not because there was anything wrong with Prabhupada's responses, but the questions themselves were not placed in a scholarly way, and therefore there was a reluctance to publish it. Eventually it did get published because Kirtanananda, much to his credit, got fed up of, the back and forth, and by the mid-80s, they had possession of the manuscripts, so they just published it without the BBT being involved. And that forced the BBT's hand. So that's available now. It is actually not studied in universities because scholars don't consider it to be up to their standard. But for us, if we want to know, the limitations of all these different kinds of philosophers and the philosophies, it's a very useful read. Gives you a lot of arguments for preaching.